report here this afternoon, it covers some of the components of winter sanding guidelines. It's based, a lot of the information in the report is based on information received from municipalities in Saskatchewan, as well as a number of municipalities in other jurisdictions throughout Canada, and also based on papers and information from websites on jurisdictions in the States. So as most of us know, certainly icy roads during the winter are a fact of life in Saskatchewan, and over the years salt and sand, certainly in this part of the country, has been the main component. Certainly like to thank the communities of tomorrow for the opportunity to be able to do the research on this project. Hopefully, as noted before, the reports have been forwarded, so hopefully there's enough information in the report that the various jurisdictions will be able to take some of that information and apply it to their own municipalities. It's a way of keeping up as to what other municipalities are doing and what's potentially working well for them, and being able to use it in your own jurisdiction. Just going to go through very quickly the summary of the report itself. As stated, it examines sanding practices in Saskatchewan and in other jurisdictions, as well as the U.S. Included also is alternate materials, technology, methods, guidelines for best practices based on Transportation Association of Canada, and recommendations for next steps. The report here was based on, certainly in Saskatchewan and other jurisdictions in Canada. A questionnaire was developed and sent out to various municipalities in Saskatchewan and to other jurisdictions. The objective was to examine current winter road maintenance practices in the various jurisdictions and provide information based on that. Results of the questionnaire, certainly, and this is very briefly, and this is basically more Saskatchewan than the other jurisdictions on this point. Municipalities have their own level of service, and we can get in maybe a bit more on that later. Saskatchewan, the main focus is on traction control and de-icing. That's more of a reactive approach versus a proactive approach, and salt is the main chemical used, and this is going to be likely repeated again. The reason for that is it's readily available in Saskatchewan. I'm going to suggest to you it's also relatively cheap versus some of the other chemicals in that are out there. Suggestions for next steps, that's included in the report. There's no real recommendations. We'll touch base a bit on that later, and the suggestions will hit as well. Summary of Saskatchewan practices. Well, there's a number of different practices out, but certainly the approach in Saskatchewan is a reactive more so than a proactive. It's based on traction and or de-icing, where a proactive approach may be anti-icing. And there's reasons, really, I think, why Saskatchewan isn't in that proactive approach yet. It's likely based on, to some extent, on the conditions that we have in this part of the country. There's a significant cost associated with it in our research, that if one wants to do that properly, it doesn't happen just like that. Oh, I want to go back one here. Pre-wetting, certainly there is some pre-wetting done in Saskatchewan. Not a lot yet at this point in time. It's likely something that could be looked at a little more in the future. Material, well, again there, the pavement temperature has a bearing on the mix and sand and salt that's being used. Majority of the municipalities in here use a blend of salt and sand. I know Regina, I believe, has experimented a little bit with just the use of sand itself without the The salt didn't get a whole lot of information back on that though, so I'm not sure how well that has worked for the city of Regina. Salt is used certainly during the warmer temperatures. A lot of the places says the pavement warms up a bit, spike the sand with a little more salt. Cycle times, and I'm going to suggest no great surprise, certainly in the larger centers, the frequency or the cycle time is a little greater than it is in the smaller municipalities. Materials, again, sand and salt is used. Got different suppliers for sand depending on the municipality, I guess, and depending on what they had for themselves. There, in some cases, it was purchased from Ministry Highways. Salt is mainly from NSC and Kiwi, depending where, I guess, the location. If you're up around Saskatoon, you're going to go NSC. If you're southern part, it may be Kiwi or an SC, depending whether you're getting it from Esterhazy or Rocanville. Again, the volumes and the cost, the range there, a wide range. Certainly the larger jurisdictions are going to use a lot more than some of the smaller jurisdictions. So specifications, the larger municipalities do have a specification for their sand. Majority of the municipalities use anywhere from 3 to 7% salt as a standard with the sand, and again, this will depend very much on the conditions out there and what they're trying to address. And some of them have used up as much as 50-50, and in some cases there'll be 100% salt, and as I indicated, Regina has, I believe, experimented a bit with just 100% sand. Monitoring and record keeping, certainly larger communities, again, monitor and keep records, great, generally focusing on type of material placed and cycle frequencies. Equipment, there's a lot of the capabilities out there, infrared thermometers. Some of the larger centers, again, will have some pre-wetting capability. Little anti-icing out there, not a lot. Automatic vehicle location, GPS systems, and with that you get some of your ground speed electronic controllers with data collectors and variable spreader settings. Again, this type of equipment is generally used in the larger centers. I could go on and on about equipment, because one of the things there that the jurisdictions have to look at is what are they trying to do with the equipment, and again, what else is that equipment being used for? If one was just going to go out and use equipment for winter sanding, then one likely goes out and purchases a certain piece of equipment or certain type. If one is using it for more than just winter road maintenance, then the jurisdictions have to look at that and what's the best fit for them. Material storage. Well, again, the solids or liquid chemicals are generally stored indoors. A lot of it is loaded outdoors. Most sand salt piles are stored outdoors with no cover or runoff control. That may be something that we'll touch on later. Salt vulnerable areas. Moose Jaw was the only municipality that indicated that they have salt vulnerable areas. Jurisdictions, as you get in the report, is there. You may want to look in Government Canada's code, and certainly TAC have guidelines or things that you should look at to determine whether in fact a municipality does have salt vulnerable areas. Snow disposal site, no engineered snow dump sites in Saskatchewan at this point in time, at least in the feedback that we got. There is 3 that monitor non-engineered snow dump sites. The wash bays, 3 municipalities indicated that they do use specialized wash bays for washing the equipment and that, and certainly with weather monitoring, Environment Canada and Weather Network were the 2 major used. Operator training, well, most jurisdictions have operator training as part of their winter road maintenance program, and a lot of that was around route familiarization, pre-season driver training, circle check procedures, spreader control operation, minor equipment repair, and good housekeeping and agency policies. Internal guidelines, there's some out there that have standing guidelines, practices, and specifications. Few have salt management, 3 have salt management plans in place, and that's likely largely based on the fact that this is mandatory to have a salt management plan. I believe Environment Canada still indicates that if you use less than 500 tones, you don't necessarily need a salt management plan. We're going to touch a bit on that later on too, because I'm going to suggest to you, even though you use small amounts, some of the other centers may want to look at implementing a salt management plan. Practices in other provinces. Again, the approach, there's a number indicated that they do have a proactive approach where they are, in fact, using some anti-icing. To go back and say in a lot of these things to the jurisdictions that we're trying to make contact, not in all cases, a lot of them are trying to make contact with municipalities that would have similar conditions, winter conditions to what's here in Saskatchewan. Now, having said that, I'm going to suggest to you there's a variety of conditions in Saskatchewan as well. Moose Jaw, for example, generally has warmer temperatures than Regina. Swift Current, Maple Creek, some of those places will again be different than some of the northern communities in Saskatchewan. There is some pre-wetting carried on again. Certainly is more pre-wetting outside of Saskatchewan than what is done inside Saskatchewan. However, some jurisdictions still indicate that they feel the need for more information and education before fully implementing this into their winter road maintenance practices or standard practices. Calcium chloride or salt brine is one of the main pre-wetting, or a couple of main pre-wetting agents. Material, again, most have specifications for sand. They use a blend of sand and salt, and again, higher concentrations in warmer temperatures. Monitoring and record keeping, that again is certainly part of the other jurisdictions' winter road maintenance programs as well. Cycle times very similar to Saskatchewan. The larger centers have a greater frequency. Material supply, volume, cost, wide range again in what the supply is going to be and the cost of it. Just for the price of salt found in there, about $10 a ton difference in some of the places. Equipment capability, certainly again, there was the infrared thermometers, pre-wetting, anti-icing, AVL, GPS, and ground speed electronic controllers with the data collectors and spreader settings again as well. Material storage. Chemicals were stored indoors or in an outdoor impermeable pad and covered facilities and with runoff control. So outside of Saskatchewan, certainly there looks to be a little more emphasis put on the storage and being a little more environmentally friendly, so to speak, in terms of looking after the materials. Snow disposal sites, most indicated that they in fact do have engineered snow dump sites. Sidewalks, this wasn't, I don't know, I can't recall whether this was a question that was asked of the Saskatchewan municipalities or not, but anyhow, most municipalities have some responsibility for a portion, and I believe that's very similar to what Regina and Saskatoon have. Wash bays, a lot of the places outside do have specialized wash bays. That's where they can separate the grit and oil as they're washing the vehicles. Weather monitoring, there's a number of places in Winnipeg, Edmonton, Adrie, use weather information systems, as well as the weather network. Operator training, again, similar to Saskatchewan, they do have their route familiarization, pre-season driver training, circle checks, spreader control, those type of things. Existence and use of internal guidelines, they've all said they do have sanding guidelines and practices and specifications and salt management plans. And that, just in this part of it, it was, these were some of the jurisdictions and municipalities that were able to make either send out the questionnaire to or be able to retrieve information off their web pages for their winter road maintenance. Cochrane, their training program includes the 4 R's of salt management, and this is, I believe, discussed in TAC and Environment Canada as well. And the 4 R's: right material, right amount, right time, right place. Ottawa was interesting enough, had stated that their pre-wetting decreases the use of their salt by 20%. It would suggest that Ottawa would certainly be a little bigger user of salt than some of the jurisdictions here. U.S. sanding practices, we tried to see what we could find in terms of pre-treating, pre-wetting, and the information there was no direct questionnaires or anything that went out to any jurisdictions in the U.S. A lot of the information was found on various web pages. A lot of the literature that we were able to research indicated that pre-wetting is in fact cost effective. Their anti-icing indicated that if I'm using not the liquid chemical, but the chemical itself, the fine products were better for anti-icing, and certainly one of the things there they had, and this is why we may not see a whole lot, or don't see a whole lot in Saskatchewan today, and may not see it in the near future either, is that good strategy when temperatures are below. Anti-icing is not a good strategy when temperatures are below -60 degrees and onset of a snowfall. There's a number of alternate materials used, and that's basically liquid versus the solids that used down in the States. Again, that's going to be for anti-icing and pre-wetting. Clear roads, and that was a development of a tool kit for cost-benefit analysis of specific winter road maintenance practices, equipment, and operations. And it was this Clear Roads project that summarized the results of practitioner surveys on information related to the winter road maintenance costs and benefits observed by agencies in the U.S. and to some extent in Canada. Down in the States, certainly again with the Clear Roads bit, the most regions surveyed use road weather information systems, the RWIS, GPS, AVL. De-icing down there is generally carried out with solid chemicals and anti-icing with liquid chemicals. Some of the top 10 cost benefits items that were mentioned in the Clear Roads project, those are anti-icing, and certainly some of these things will be somewhat standard to some of the people here, in the use of front and underbody plows, pavement temperature sensors, RWIS, de-icing, GPS, maintenance decision support systems, carbide blades, and air temperature sensors. Another thing you may want to look at there, you can get back in and find the information on, is the Snow Fighter's Handbook, and it provides a fair bit of information in there in terms of application rates and other type of things. Alternate sanding practices. Well, there are a variety of materials that various jurisdictions use for de-icing and anti-icing and are pre-wetting. Again, I think what happens there, you have to find your own best fit for that, depending on your budgets, type of equipment you have, and again, the amount of network that one has to take care of. And certainly, materials have their own unique characteristics, so it's going to be very much dependent on climate, the cost, availability of the materials for you, and certainly availability is also going to take into consideration cost, and type of material that you're applying on any given day is also going to be based on what you're trying to address on that particular day, or the various mixes that you put in there. And when we talk about availability here, and unfortunately, we don't have, I'm not sure, I shouldn't say unfortunately, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure how many politicians are in the room here, but certainly people working for the various jurisdictions. I don't think the next comment is going to be a big surprise. That salt is used here. You hear the politicians wanting to use something else here. Well, it's still readily available. You go down into the States, yes, there's other materials used in that. Some of those places will be putting their order in very shortly, and that's it. They may not be able to get salt that readily later on in the year if they miscalculate and they starting to run out. They don't get it just like that. Once the roads are cleared here, a lot of the jurisdictions here are 2 or 3 hours away of being able to get additional salt to their facilities and carry on using it. Certainly the other thing with the materials is it's good to know the pros and cons, and in the report there's a number of pros and cons listed in the section of the report. And again, before one starts putting down application rates and things like that, that's another good reason to know the pros and cons to see what may happen. And as well, know the equipment needs that you need and storage facilities for the various materials. There's no sense in me ordering a bunch of material and then find out that, boy, I don't really have anywhere to store this stuff. So one should be taking a look at all of that and see how it all fits together. And applications rates will vary according to temperature, the weather event, and the type of treatment, again, that it's being used for. Technology, road weather information systems down there, you got detection technology. They have a significant impact on the effective winter road maintenance. One certainly needs to know some handle on the weather or what's happening with it to make things more effective for them. In terms of application rate, the best choice of materials to use, and also the timing of application. As indicated earlier, anti-icing is the application of a chemical to a roadway before or at the start of a weather event. Some of the research we got, it's safer for road users, reduces the amount of abrasives that one has to use for traction, and it can reduce cleanup costs. However, successful anti-icing requires weather forecasts and pavement temperatures in advance to ensure one has sufficient time to apply and know when to apply the product. Guidelines, best practices, that's where we get into the TAC, the salt management plan. TAC has published the best practices, a number of them out there, there's about in 2007. The objective was to guide agencies to provide safe, efficient, and cost-effective and environmentally friendly roadway systems. The code does recommend the development of a salt management plan and implementing the best practices. There's a number of them out there, but certainly some of the other ones that will be first and foremost is salt application, storage, and removal, disposal of snow. If one can adopt a salt management plan, it commits the organization to measurable improvements in their salt management practices. If it's done and signed off, it also has buy-in from the politicians and senior managers and fleet services if they're in your jurisdiction. It's buy-in from everybody within the organization that is involved in winter road maintenance. Salt management plan will certainly establish one's current practices to prove a benchmark against which progress can be measured. So a salt management plan also allows you to see how you're doing. And some of the components in there is on road use, and this is number of fleets, pre-wetting capability, and number of percentages of other things in there, your percentage of your fleet that can apply liquids, the percentage that have electronic spreader controls, RWIS installations, those types of things. Documentation is certainly again in that. That's another good component. Got to have documentation to know what is in fact going on out there. Again, your proposed approaches, training is in there as well. You got your managers, supervisors, percent and frequency of staff being trained. Must have slide in here someplace. No. I've touched on salt management areas before, and it's not in here. But the groundwater recharge areas, if you're got runoff close to a groundwater recharge area, then you may have a salt vulnerable area. If you've got runoff that's going into a source that's very close to a drinking water, you've also got some salt vulnerable area. Your documentation is going to go into documented policies, procedures, guidelines, level of service, what are you trying to provide, application rates, sand salt storage, what else is going on in your good housekeeping practices. Proposed approaches, one can be to make sure you have clear task schedules with milestone budget considerations. There are 4 areas of concern out there: general road use, salt use in sand vulnerable areas, salt storage, and snow storage and disposal. Training, salt management plans will require changes in procedure, practices, and equipment requirements. So there's going to require comprehensive training, and education programs are going to need it to be included in a salt management plan. Monitoring, record keeping, again, there's certainly you want to monitor your baseline conditions and also how you make improvements each and every year. So every year you're going to have a new baseline. Management review, again there it's management can review the previous year's actions and confirm what there was for successful outcomes, and then make adjustments for their following year. Pavement salt management is affected by type of pavement surface, pavement thermal, and material properties. You got the snow disposal. They contain contaminants, so you may want to be looking at how you can capture some of the solids that come off with the meltwater, settling areas. TAC includes the site selection and development process that is good for everybody. You got the equipment technology, while it's evolving all the time, it's becoming more cost effective and efficiency. Information, in order to make best maintenance decisions, one certainly needs support out there to base rather than just judgment. If you've got good information, it helps you base a decision not only on your judgment but other information as well. Mechanical sensors, you got pavement or subsurface, accumulated snow can be mechanically removed. Snow plowing, those type of things. Guidelines for best practices, again, you got the snow and ice. Well, it's basically anti-icing is a proactive approach, and pre-wetting is a method that can be used to improve the retention of material that is applied to the roadways. Spreader equipment has an impact, application rates. Again, we get into the record keeping again, go through with that. Talked a bit about that before. Training, again, these were a number of things that in the tax guidelines that they talk about. There'll be other ones as well. Agency policies, you got the infrared thermometer use. Conclusions. Approach to winter road maintenance, Saskatchewan, as I said before, it's mainly de-icing and traction control. You got the salt is there because of the availability and cost. Environmental concerns are certainly with salt and sand stockpiles being stored on outside and uncovered. Municipalities have their own level of service, and therefore I'm going to suggest making a single set of guidelines for every municipality in Saskatchewan is likely less than desirable. And the decision should be based on pavement temperature versus temperature of the air. And anti-icing pre-wetting seem to be more efficient and cost-effective methods of snow and ice control where they can be used. Pre-wetting can be beneficial and effective without your accurate weather forecast. It's still there. The literature has indicated that you certainly don't need the accurate weather forecast because, again, you're trying to retain that material on the roadway. Anti-icing, we've talked about it, alternate products out there. There's all kinds of them for pre-wetting and anti-icing. Just looked at a couple here, Fusion and Geomelt and Ice Band. And they're all made from organics. However, one of the downsides of these products made from organics is that they require attention throughout the year. And they also have a higher cost associated with them. The Fusion is made beets, and again, they say it should be agitated in the tank periodically. And I know my experience, and certainly with the city of Regina, Ice Band does come with its problems in the off season if it's still some remaining there. So that creating that road salt management plan again is a good start. Winter road maintenance program is a system of components. They work together to improve the system as a whole. And again, what may work in one jurisdiction due to budgets, due to level of service and other things there will not necessarily work in another jurisdiction. Suggested next steps. Well, establish that level of service. Create a salt management plan. Once a municipality has a level of service defined and knowing what they're trying to achieve, then they can go about developing procedures to provide the defined level, or to accomplish that defined level of service. If I do not know what I'm trying to achieve, I'm sort of shooting in the dark as to how I'm going about doing things. So if you've got a salt management plan that comes in there, gives you an idea what you're trying to achieve, and you can go back, and not only that, you can determine how well you were doing it also, which can then in turn help you make contact with the public out there. The salt management plan certainly organizes current practices, and it gives consideration to future goals for you as well. It describes where one is today and where one wants to go and basically how to get there. And by monitoring it, it can show you how well you're doing in terms of progress. Anti-icing has shown that it is beneficial. However, again, around here, because the temperatures and that, it may not necessarily be all that great at this point in time. With the anti-icing, again, it would be suggested that road weather information systems should be in place, and that's quite costly. So it's not likely something that a jurisdiction in Saskatchewan can take on by themselves. It's likely something that jurisdictions can maybe work with the province of Saskatchewan and the Ministry of Highways and other interested parties in setting up some of these things. There's the one, yes, I can have the sensors in the pavement itself to get the temperature of the pavement, but some of the other information is out there. There'll be towers, and it gives an indication where that storm is coming from, the advancement of the storm, and what may or may not take place. Because I know, again, with my own experiences in contact with the Weather Network or Environment Canada, boy, be prepared. We think we got a major storm coming in from the south on Friday. You get 10 to 15 centimeters of snow. Friday comes, Saturday comes, Sunday's come, maybe got a skiff of snow. Next time around, well, be prepared. We're just a heads up, there's a event coming through. However, you're not likely going to receive any snowfall at this point in time, maybe a centimeter or two. This time you get dumped with 6. So for anti-icing in that, or I should say 6 inches, at 15 centimeters. So the arborist is a component that you need. Pre-wetting. This may be something that that municipalities may want to carry out on a trial basis, and it may be something that even communities of tomorrow want to provide support in carrying it out on a trial basis. It's being used outside of Saskatchewan. It still isn't being used a whole lot in here. Personally, from my own experience, little as it was, because we didn't get going with it, and I don't think it has been advanced anymore today in the city of Regina. I believe it does have merit. It takes information and it takes some trial to find out what type of application rates that are required under certain conditions. It does require a trial and error to determine what's going forward. In cases of banding together to get materials from other jurisdictions and that, I think again that's something that maybe the individual jurisdictions have to look at. Some smaller ones around the city of Regina, it may be beneficial for them if they aren't doing it to work with the city of Regina, obtain their materials from there. I know some get it from Ministry of Highways. If I'm in a location that's close to Rocanville or Esterhazy, in fact, maybe it is just as cheap for me to get that salt from those jurisdictions rather than buying it from somebody larger, because there's a cost associated with transportation. So certainly if I'm Yorkton, I'm not necessarily going to be buying salt from the city of Regina, because a lot farther to transport it than I would from Esterhazy or Rocanville. But it's, again, the various jurisdictions where you're out there, see who you can touch base with and see, in fact, what they are paying. Calcium chloride was a common agent used for pre-wetting. It's maybe an anti-icing. It's maybe something that jurisdictions want to experiment with. Fusion, this was another one that can be obtained from Manitoba. So as I said, it is organic. There's some problems associated with that. The cons is you got to keep working it in the summer and that. Technology, certainly those places that don't have ABL GPS, again,
any other thoughts off the floor pre-wetting before we go on to other?
I was just wondering that what some of the basic science of it is, because it's in dry, because it's in solution, it's more efficient than just having dry mix, or
yes,
is that the rough science of it?
It's the rough science of it. That's exactly it. And certainly, I'm using it for pre-wetting. It has a tendency, because a bit of a briny solution there, to stick on the road rather than bounce. Saskatoon would have a number of roadways, certainly Regina, Ring Road now, where you're going at a relatively decent speed applying that. Material will bounce and scatter, where this will help it stick. Not necessarily in all cases, but yes, that's the theory. It lowers it goes into solution rather than just using salt. Okay, it's the brine that starts the action.
Yeah, and I thought of salt, when it's even dry, it needs to melt its own water to get into its own brine to do the same thing.
Yes.
So you get ahead of the game.
That's exactly it. The short and simple way of
Okay,
describing.
I just wanted to, because we're kind of new to this, and our own staff here, your slide hit it on the head. We have complete staff turnover. It just was, I don't know, that's what we did last year, so good. Nobody.
A lot of jurisdictions, in fact, do use the salt brine as a pre-wetting agent.
Kevin, was comment on your table?
Well, actually, we did talk a little bit about the pre-wetting and so on, but we didn't have any specific questions for Carlyle directly. But I actually had a question with regards to your mention of the cost benefits of being proactive for the anti-icing process. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Is that contingent? Is the cost savings contingent on having weather monitoring systems and pavement temperature monitoring systems, or is it be a process that municipality can automatically adopt and see some cost savings value?
The anti-icing, any of the research we got and looked into there, it was very much suggested that one needs good weather forecasting in order to bring that on stream. And that's where I say here for to get the road weather information systems up and running. That's something bigger than the municipalities. Ontario, I believe, way back when a number of years ago, they have something set up there, a number of these stations throughout the province and that going through, and it does help other cities down in the States. I don't know where they're going today because there's a lot of them that had some difficulties down there financially as well. They set them up, have them in there because it can, the event, cities are large enough where one portion of the city could be impacted and another one not necessarily impacted the same way. So I got various treatments throughout there. Winnipeg, I think Manitoba has one in the province. Winnipeg has one, and the information I got from there was that they were looking at installing another station, not necessarily the pucks in the pavement to get the pavement temperature. An easy way for pavement temperature is the infrared thermometers to be able to capture some of that information a little cheaper. But this was a weather information monitoring system itself, so they could track how the storm was coming in.
Carlyle, was the talk at your table?
One of the main issues, I guess, is mainly smaller municipalities with regard to being able to consider utilizing new technology is cost. And I guess Carl mentioned maybe one option for that is looking at collaborative or regional type initiatives to somewhat try to reduce the cost. The other thing was, Wayne mentioned Moose Jaw, even though they're not at the level that they require a salt management plan, they implemented one, and they've seen, like I said, a number of benefits that come out of it for them, both communication-wise, both internally and externally, being able to justify their budgets, which to me is a big plus. If you put in a budget to justify it, they have a lot of questions about it. And the other thing is sort of forces you to do monitoring and tracking, which then brings some visual sense to they find it more
I would certainly agree with that assessment. That's exactly it. That's one of the reasons to have a salt management plan. And having said that, now yes, the sizes of the municipalities are different. So Saskatoon, for instance, Regina, may have a more comprehensive salt management plan than a Moose Jaw or a Yorkton. And in turn, Moose Jaw or Yorkton may have more comprehensive than some of the smaller communities yet. However, you still got that plan in front of you, and you still got something that you can use to monitor and go forward with. And certainly, as Harlan indicated, that if you got it set up in there, it is something that one can use for getting information out to the public as well as budgeting purposes.
Well, I'm agree with the comment.
We got a couple of questions. One might be a bit of a curveball here. First question is about potassium chloride. Is there any merit in it as an alternative to sodium chloride?
I think it's used in there. I'd have to look. I don't know whether I got that information in here or not as to what all was used. Chloride salt, sodium chloride, calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, blended chlorides, calcium, magnesium acetate, potassium acetate, yes, liquid only. So it is there, it is used, and there's lots of them out there, but again, it's going to depend on cost, availability, and that type of thing.
The environmental considerations are certainly forefront in cost management. So are there any benefits to something like potassium chloride, sodium chloride from the environment?
I don't have a ready available, well, I have a ready available answer for it, but it isn't what you're looking for. One has to go back and see all these, they're all there. They all have some environmental impact. Sand has an environmental impact itself. So if we go to pre-wetting anti-icing, we're using these chlorides, we're using salt brine. So it's still there. The issue becomes, am I using less? And if I'm using less, then it should have, in theory, some environmental benefit to it. So I think again there one would have to go in, and it's likely in some literature we got someplace, and it talks about the corrosiveness of these various products and that. I don't have that information at the right offhand, but it is there, and one would have to look at some of those things. Yes.
I know for Yorkton, it's been 5 years now, but at that time we switched over to magnesium chloride. It was a little cheaper than calcium, and the dosage rates to keep your pile fluid in the winter was less than calcium, so I don't know what the cost is there. I mean, since that time was probably using looks like a sounding part of it. I don't know, City of Melville, like, we switched over to having just sound and be a building. I mean, we managed to save $50,000 over here by doing that, by not using mag chloride, but and now we're up against jobs running out of space, but in Melville, they don't use anything. They freeze-dry the pile. They basically take their pile and flatten it out, let it freeze, and then push it back up, and then it keeps the pile useful. They'll get the big chunks out of it, and we'll try that.
Sort of that's the setting for this table, very low salt and none. The second question is, several municipalities and provinces have airports. They also have problems with ice. It's probably not a fair question to ask in this context, but we're raising him a lesson for business. Ice control is also an issue with airports.
Yes.
Are they generally using the same procedures they use on the roads on the runways? Is that what people do?
That I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you I've got a little information on potassium chloride. And this is one of the other things with all these chemicals too. How low can that temperature drop and have it still work? And one of the ones is potassium chloride minus 11 degrees C. Calcium chloride is lower than that. So that's the other thing you have to look at too when you're using these various chemicals. When that temperature gets lower, which are some of the better ones. And in the research, a little bit that we did find in there, is the calcium chloride and even that fuse, which is the beet juice. And that's been tried too with likely mixed success, but they have some of the lower temperatures. So there's a number of considerations to take into account when you're looking at various chemicals to be used.
Other points, questions for Carlyle?
I was just wondering if there's any regulatory guidelines for salt, that way there's salt management programs that are required.
The question is whether there's any regulations on salt usage.
I don't know. I've gone away from that a little bit, but as I stated during the presentation, at one time, it's not regulatory yet, and there could be new guidelines, and I was just informing that there's some new guidelines coming out and things. However, at that time, it was if you use 500 ton, and they were looking for jurisdictions to do it voluntarily rather than mandatory, that you have a salt management plan. So I don't think that's there yet. And from my knowledge that there was likely enough compliance that it isn't regulated at this point in time, but certainly that was part of it. If they didn't think they were going to get compliance, the next step would be you have to bring in regulations for it. But with the salt management plan, it requires, and I've got to be careful what I say here. I know it did at one time, so I can't comment on what's happening today now, but at one time, one had to submit a report into Environment Canada in June of each year.
Well, I was just going to make a point. Carlyle and I were talking, and the taxed salt guide that was done in 1999 has just been redone, and I think it's being released this summer. It was supposed to be ready for the conference in October, so there'll be it's updated with all the new information from research at Waterloo and so on. And it also covers some of the issues that were raised in classifying salt as a toxic substance and so on, and what's been done in the last 15 years or whatever. So probably a good source for people.
That's what I was going to say, that I would suggest that comes out as likely a very beneficial tool for you to have and go over and see what's there. A lot of information in there. There isn't anything saying one has to follow and everything. However, it certainly gives a lot of good guidelines to follow.
I just have more, two quickies. Just so I'm sure, on the anti-icing, that's the same as grinding. That's the same as like just hose it down the road with
Anti-icing is your pre-wetting your road, yes.
And is there, and then, so like, I can see somewhere, where like, where, eventually things melt or whatever. But here, like you were saying, if you've got a blizzard coming, you wet everything down, it's just going to help everything to stick like a Slurpee. So this Saskatchewan, I'm just trying to figure, on the bridge decks maybe.
A lot of them, and that's one of the, certainly Regina, what we got for bridge decks in here to be concerned of. Winnipeg and other jurisdictions where there are a lot of bridge decks and things, they've got this is equipment, they can't go back in equipment. It's automatic. They can spray it in some places. But certainly the issue is with the anti-icing and everything, and that's why it's very important, again, to have good weather forecasts coming in. Because if I got blowing conditions, I can create the problem rather than solving the problem, because I put the anti-icing agent on, the snow blows across, the concentration is gone, diluting it, and it freezes sooner rather than later. It freezes at a higher temperature rather than a lower temperature, and I create problems rather than solve them.
So you're going to have an anti-icing too, you've got to be ready, dialed in every event, like almost like a fire department.
That's why I've indicated that town one really has some good weather forecasting. Is not necessarily something that you want to look at.
The other one I was curious, and I didn't read it down, maybe it's in the references, or I was always curious if there were some, even the authors' recommendations on maybe some different gradations to look at. Driving to Calgary, and I think there's a small reference to it where the Red Deer or Calgary, they'll use chips, or like a larger crush aggregate, or if there's any, any point or guide in a direction where right now all we do kind of use, keep using the same stuff. It works and everything else, but I'm just kind of curious of.
Sometimes if it works, that's a good thing. There may not be a need to.
In Calgary, I know it's got to be at least 3/8-inch chips that go in, that they send out. Sometimes you get your windshield broke pretty easy there.
I have to go back and look. I do know this much in our research and in the questionnaires that we sent out and got back. A number of jurisdictions have a specification for their sand. And I kind of think, I have to look and see here again, but that information will be in the appendices there. Regina has a specification for sand. I think Saskatoon does too, and a few others, and some of the ones outside jurisdictions as well. Because again, they have it. They don't want to get a whole lot of, in the sand itself, a whole lot of fines in there, because that can create some problems for you as well, makes things slippery. And the chips, there'll be a certain size there, because like you say, stone bruises could be, but they're also, I got that snowpack there and it's extremely cold temperatures, and the pre-wetting, that may help them again too to embed themselves into the snowpack.
Anybody else? Other points?
The only other one
I guess one more.
the only thing I was going to throw out is I've always thought too, like for everybody buying their sand or whatever, we should. Everybody's got their local experience, but you never know. Maybe we can buy a bunch. Taking our few communities that are close, St. Paul distance apart. Right now, ours must walk as big as PA and Melfort or whatever. Everybody buy one big contract.
And that is certainly something that I would suggest that the jurisdiction should look into. If it's being produced in Waka, then if PA is there, they can maybe go down to Waka and pick it up just as easy as Saskatoon or however it comes in. Yes.
We are in fact working on a regional purchasing initiative right now, another project we're investigating, so we'll report on that.
Now, PA may have lots of sand around themselves, so, but those are things that one has to look into.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Carlyle.
Well, thank you, and I'd certainly like to thank Kevin because he was, I guess, our Stantec's contact for this particular project, so thanks very much, Kevin.